Hey guys, it's Bridget with San Diego Seed Company, and what am I doing with all of these steaks? Well, I'm offloading the last of the 600 steaks that we got for the farm for all of our tomatoes this year. So obviously this video is going to be about steak, not the medium rare kind. We're talking about wooden steaks. We're going to talk about how to stake your tomatoes, the different ways that we do it, and everything that I've learned in my over a decade of growing tomatoes here in zone 9 and 10. But before I do that, make sure you hit the like and subscribe button so you're notified anytime we put out a video, and so that I can be a part of helping you grow better. So let's go. So I've got this puny little stack of steaks. I would carry more, but I'm carrying a lot these days with this baby, so this is as many as I'm carrying for the video. We've got, oh, poop. Whatever. We have a whole field of tomatoes here, and this is just one of the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 fields we're gonna have of tomatoes here on the farm. And it's a lot, and that means we've got to stake them. We got to get them up off the ground. And we just had somebody email us, so hopefully you're watching this video, because you had emailed us about these exact questions I'm gonna go over. And as a new gardener, when you're planting tomatoes, it can be a little overwhelming thinking about all of the different options you have to stabilize your tomatoes. You can use cages, you can use the low and lean system, which we absolutely love. You can use cattle panel, you can do so many different things. And we have lots of resources on our website that really help to break down each of those systems and which ones you use. But just as a general rule of thumb, I'll kind of run over it with you. So a lot of the tomatoes we have in this field, and actually if you look at them, it's pretty easy to tell. These rows right here, they look like kind of normal tomatoes, right? They're kind of stringy and long. And then if you go over here, these guys look like little Christmas trees. They're short, they're squat, really big leaves. These are actually dwarf tomatoes. So we've got a combination of tomatoes in this field, and we're staking them all the same way, and we're doing it for number one reason: economics. Because we're growing so many tomatoes this year, 600 in total, we can't afford 600 of some of the more complicated trellising systems. And also, because a lot of these are growing for trial, we're gonna grow them, we're gonna taste them. We're not necessarily doing production that you would for on a production farm, or if you're a backyard gardener and you're trying to can or get a lot of tomatoes. So you'll see what we've used is stakes, the wooden stakes. There are a variety of sizes here, depending on what we have sourced from the farm. We've recycled lumber, we've reused stuff, we've cut up lumber, we've used all kinds of stuff to try to make it work. And we've also, in addition, we've had to buy stakes, which is kind of a bummer. Really want to use what we have, but we just needed more stakes. The most important factor in your stakes when you're thinking about what to use is to use untreated lumber. These have not been treated, they're just regular raw wood. And you know if it's been treated because it will have these little dimples on it. And the little dimples are actually where they inject the different chemicals that they use to make the wood last longer. You don't really want that in your garden, and you really don't want that next to your tomatoes, so you really want to make sure that your wood is untreated. This is natural untreated lumber. And we put these in when we planted the tomatoes. A lot of times what people do is they put in the tomato, and then they let the tomato get pretty big, and then they come along later and they drive the stake in. And it's not the end of the world, but you are driving the stake through the root mass of the tomato, which is not really gonna do it any favors. The other factor is I wanna start tying up my tomatoes immediately the moment that I plant them. Why? Because it's easier to manage. I can stay on top of pruning, I can have neater, cleaner plants, I can watch for disease and pests a lot easier. If you let your tomato get out of control and then try to trellis it afterwards, you're creating way more work for yourself in the long run. So we do, the moment the tomatoes go in, they get a stake. They get tied up. I will continue to tie these up the stake as they grow. Now, as I mentioned, if you're new to our channel, keep in mind this is a dwarf tomato. We love dwarf tomatoes. It's a product that we really have done a lot of work and research and development on, because I like the fact that you can use a pretty puny little stake. I mean, this stake is a joke if you're trying to use it for something like an Indeterminate black Krim heirloom tomato. Forget about it. That thing's gonna get huge. But for a dwarf, this works perfectly fine. We've got everything staked so that we can get them up off the ground nice and neatly. And then throughout the season, if need be, not necessarily on these dwarfs, but on these other tomatoes here that are not dwarf tomatoes, we will do a Florida weave. Now, why would I want to use the Florida weave on these plants? Well, because in general, you don't want your tomato plants just growing on the ground. Is it possible? Absolutely, you can do that. Your production is going to be lower, especially if you're in a rainy climate. You're going to have more problems with disease. You're just really not going to have the production that you want. And it's also very difficult to harvest when it's laying on the ground. In our particular farm setting, we can't do that. These need to be up off the ground. They need to be neat. I need to be able to see what's going on. I need to be able to investigate diseases and pests and be able to harvest easier as well. We want to be able to come in through here and harvest pretty quickly and pretty easily. And that can't happen if we've got things growing on the ground. It's a total mess. In fact, if we go back to last year, there's some pretty hilarious times where we couldn't even walk through the field because we let things get out of control. Don't make that mistake. Make sure you stake up your tomatoes, whether you use wooden stakes like this or a different system. So let me just show you really quickly. If you don't have wooden stakes, you can kind of use whatever. These are tomato cages that we had lying around. We're utilizing what we have. You can tell that we've used some, and we did it every other actually, so we can run string through here. We've got stakes on some other ones. Again, use what you can. There's a million different systems out there, but here's 2 factors that I want you to consider that is so incredibly important. Ask yourself, what kind of tomato are you growing? So an indeterminate tomato gives you tomatoes at an indeterminate amount of time, and especially with some of the heirloom favorites like Black Krim, Purple Cherokee, there's so many different varieties. They grow almost like a pole or a vine, so you need a massive system to hold them up. That is why we recommend the low and lean system. If you haven't checked that out, we've got tons of videos on it. It's fabulous. It's definitely for type A personalities if you want really clean, neat vines that you can manage very easily. Otherwise, you need a good trellising system. Something like this would not work for an indeterminate pole tomato. You would be cussing at yourself midway through the season because the plant would be everywhere and it would really be kind of a joke. The other type of tomato plant is a determinate tomato plant, and that is a plant that gives you a determinate amount of tomatoes at a time. And those are usually things that are like sauce tomato, paste tomatoes. They tend to be a little more squat and a little more bushy, but that's not always the case. It's just a generalization. Now, in those 2 categories, we now have dwarf tomatoes, and that's the little Christmas trees that you see on our farm. Those are a variety in it of itself. They're very small, they're very easy to trellis, and you can get away with just one little stake. So just remember, think about what the plant is going to look like midway through the season, and choose your trellis or your post accordingly. All right, to summarize a little bit of what I've talked about, when you're growing your tomato, if you're growing an indeterminate tomato, you need a very big stake, or you need some system that is much more heavier and better suited than a puny little tomato cage. That ain't gonna work, I promise you. So either a very long, tall stake that you can tie the tomato up, cattle panel, a more robust tomato cage like this. Now, if you're growing an indeterminate on a stake, a very long, tall stake, prune to 1 liter. That makes it a lot easier because you can wrap the tomato around the stake and it can be a lot neater and easier to harvest. Now, if you're growing a determinate tomato or a dwarf, you can put them on a smaller stake because they're not going to get as big. The most important factor is to remember what the tomato plant is going to look like midway through the season and plan for it beforehand versus dealing with it halfway through the season. That's when you break branches, you lose tomatoes, you're cursing, it's a whole mess. Your arms are all green from pruning. Trust me, I've made the mistake before. Plan ahead and your garden will be way happier for it.